Photoshop is a mix of constructs that are bitmap-based and constructs that are vector-based. The vector-based constructs are called shapes, and that is what we're going to look at now. Shapes are probably the thing you will use most in technical drawings. Photoshop comes with a number of built-in shapes. You access shapes by using the Shape tool, whose icon is third up from the bottom of the tool panel on the left. If you click on that icon and hold the mouse button down, a panel with a list of shapes will fly out. We're going to try out the rounded rectangle shape. When you click on a shape icon, the tool panel at the top of the screen turns into a panel for that kind of shape. You can use the shape panel to draw either a vector shape or a bitmap. We are working with vector-based shapes, so make sure that the drop-down at the left end of the shape panel says Shape. A shape has three parts: a shape path, a fill, and a stroke. This is classic vector-based drawing. You have a path, which is really just a line, that is filled to color its interior and stroked to color its border. In this case, the shape path is the boundary of a rounded corner rectangle. Click on the Fill drop-down to access the Color Selection panel. In the upper right of that panel, you will see a multicolored square. Click on that and the Color Picker panel appears. We'll use this to make the fill color blue. Set H to 240, S and B to 100, then click OK. Later in this course, we will cover how colors are managed and used in Photoshop, but for now we are just going to work with a few custom colors made on the fly as we need them. Now do the same thing with the stroke drop-down, but set the color to green by making H120 and S and B 100. There are a number of other settings in the Shape panel that we will discuss later, but for now just copy the settings you see in the video. Now we are ready to draw a rounded corner rectangle. Make sure that the simple figure layer is still selected. The rectangle will be drawn out from its center. Put the cursor near the center of the canvas, press the mouse button, and drag out a rectangle. Notice that it is filled with blue and bounded with green. That is, the shape has been drawn according to the parameters that were in the Shape panel at the top of the screen. Also notice that the thumbnail in the simple figure layer entry in the Layers panel has changed. It has almost been filled with a small version of the rectangle we have just drawn. Also, there is now a little icon inside it that looks like a square with little squares on each corner. This icon is meant to represent a shape path, and it indicates that this layer is a shape layer. A shape layer can only hold the shape. For example, you could not add text to this layer. To add another rectangle just like this one, just click on the canvas where you want its center. When the Create Rounded Rectangle dialog appears, just click OK. Now we have two rounded rectangles in our drawing. However, notice that a new shape layer was added. Photoshop does vector drawing a bit differently than most other editors, probably because of its origin as a bitmap editor. In an editor like AutoCAD, each shape is an independent object with its own set of visual properties, and you can put as many of these shapes and anything else on a layer as you want. In Photoshop, it is the shape layer that has the visual properties, not the shape itself. To see this, select the Simple Figure layer and make sure that the Shape tool in the panel on the left is selected. The Shape tool panel at the top of the screen is showing you the properties of the shape on the Simple Figure shape layer. Go to the Shape panel and click on the Fill drop-down. Open the Color Picker panel and make the value of H 0. Note that the fill of the rectangle on the Simple Figure layer has changed to red. So the Shape panel not only shows you the properties of the shape layer, it also allows you to change those properties. That's why sometimes this type of drawing editor is called a parametric drawing editor. A set of parameters you set or edit determine what is drawn on the screen. With this example so far, it's kind of hard to see that the shape properties are really layer properties, because there is only one rectangle on the Simple Figure layer. We can put a second rectangle on the Simple Figure layer, but you might be thinking that just a moment ago, when we added a rectangle, that rectangle was not added to the layer we were working on. Photoshop created a brand new layer for it. What happens when you add a shape is determined by the path operation that is in effect when you add that shape. The path operation is part of the Shape panel, but it's not a layer property. It's a global property that affects how the next shape you add is managed. Make sure the Simple Figure layer is selected. Then go to the Shape tool panel and change the path operation to Combine Shapes. The icon for the path operation is just to the right of the center of the Shape tool panel. Then add another rectangle by clicking on the background. A new rectangle that is a copy of the one that is already on the Simple Figure layer is added to that layer. The thumbnail for the simple figure layer has changed too. It's hard to see because the shape layer icon is covering it, but the thumbnail now shows two rectangles. Now change the color of the stroke from green to blue by using the color picker to change the H value to 240. Notice that the boundary of both rectangles on the simple figure layer was changed to blue. That's because the parameters shown in the shape panel belong to the shape layer, not to any individual figures that might be in that shape layer. In other words, everything on that layer that needs to be filled will be filled with red, and everything that needs to be stroked will be stroked with blue, and so on. Change the layer selection between the simple figure layer and the rounded rectangle one layer. Notice that when the selection changes, the properties in the Shape Tool panel change. Again, this is because the shape properties are the properties of the selected layer. So to change the properties of a shape, like its fill color, you need to select the layer the shape is on, make sure the Shape Tool is selected, and then change the properties. For example, you can select the rounded rectangle one layer and change its stroke style to dotted line. The idea of the shape properties belonging to the layer can be carried further to multiple layers. For example, you can do this by clicking on the simple figure layer in the Layers panel, then while holding down the Shift key, clicking on the rounded rectangle one layer. Now both layers are selected in the Layers panel. Go to the Shape Tool panel and change the stroke style to dashed line. Notice that the rectangles on both layers now have dashed boundaries. The Shape Tool tracks the properties of the panel it is selected, so one of the easy ways to duplicate a shape is to just select the layer it is on, for example the rounded rectangle layer, and then just click on the canvas where you want that copy placed. Of course, because we now have the path operation set to new layer, we get a new layer too. You can also make changes to the shape directly. Select the rounded rectangle one layer, then select the Move tool. You do that by clicking on its icon that looks like a diagonal arrow and is up at the top of the tool panel on the left side. Notice that the blue rectangle has some grab handles on it. You can use that to change the size by pulling on a grab handle. Also, if you put the cursor somewhat outside of the blue rectangle, you will see a curved double-headed arrow appear. You can use that to rotate the rectangle. The changes we have made so far are not permanent. You have to click on the check in the upper right-hand corner to make them stick. You can, if you want, undo the temporary change by clicking on the circle with the line through it. Now click on the simple figure layer in the Layers panel. Notice that both red rectangles are in a single outline with grab handles. That's because Photoshop sees them as the same shape because they are on the same layer. If you pull on a grab handle or rotate it, both rectangles are affected. Again, click on the check mark to make the changes you have made stick. If you click on the icon for the Shape tool and hold the mouse button down, you will see a number of different built-in shapes. With the exception of Line and Custom, they are pretty much self-explanatory. Let's add one of each of these shapes just by selecting it and then clicking on the canvas. You can do quite a bit of technical drawing just with these shapes, but there are a number of custom shapes built into Photoshop, and you can add your own custom shapes too. That'll be covered later in this course. So where do all these built-in shapes come from? Are they just some hard-coded stuff Adobe has added to Photoshop? For the most part, no. They are just shape paths that happen to have hard-coded menu entries. In fact, you can see the shape paths, select the rounded rectangle one layer in the Layers panel, then fly out the Paths panel from the Tool panel on the far right. It's an icon below the Layers icon and looks like some lines with little squares. It's kind of small, but you can see a white tilted rectangle in the thumbnail image in the Paths panel. That's the shape path for the blue rectangle on the rounded rectangle one layer. You can make the thumbnail larger if you wish by opening the menu list for the Paths panel, clicking on Panel Options, and selecting the size you would like. Close the Paths flyout now and select the Ellipse one layer. Then open the Paths flyout again. Here you will see the shape for the path of an ellipse, which in this case is a circle. And one more time, close the Paths flyout, select the simple figure layer, then open the Paths flyout. Notice there are two separate shape paths on this layer. If you are following along with the example, you should save Drawing 1 by pressing Ctrl-S or using File Save from the application menu at the top of the screen. This will, by default, save your drawing as a PSD or Photoshop document file. This format is, of course, the native Photoshop format and retains the internal structure of the drawing. However, it's not a format that will allow you to share your drawing with others unless they also have Photoshop. A more general format that will allow others to view your drawing is PNG. PNG is a lossless compression, so it will maintain all the drawing details, but loses the internal structure of the drawing. To save your drawing as a PNG file, use Save As, then select PNG. Use small compression and no interlace. PNG is also the format to use when you want to make your drawing part of a word processing document or a slide set. This will be covered in more detail later in this course. One of the issues you will run into once you start to create a lot of drawings is finding them. Neither the Windows Explorer nor the Mac Finder does, out of the box, display PSD files like it will a Ping. Photoshop includes a tool called Bridge, which among other things acts like a directory explorer but will display PSD files. You access Bridge through the application menu Windows Extensions Mini Bridge. You may be asked to start Bridge when you first do this, but just click on the Start Bridge button if that happens. This makes the Mini Bridge panel appear. It contains a strip of images from a directory. You can drill through the directories with the breadcrumbs at the top of the panel. You can slide through the strip of images at the bottom of the panel. You can open an image in Photoshop by double-clicking it. It appears in a tab window in Photoshop. You can close that window by clicking on the X on the tab. A right mouse click on the Mini Bridge tab lets you minimize the Mini Bridge window. Clicking on the Mini Bridge tab restores it. There is also a standalone version of Bridge that you can access by clicking on its icon. It gives you more flexibility in viewing images, and double-clicking one of them opens it in Photoshop just like it does in Mini Bridge. You can close the standalone Bridge by clicking on its upper right corner. And you can close the Mini Bridge with a right mouse click. You can add a similar capability to the Windows Explorer by using the Fast Picture Viewer codec. It lets Windows Explorer preview PSD and many other types of image files. Lastly, the same company that makes the codec for Windows also makes a standalone tool for browsing images, including PSD files. It's different than Bridge, but it lets you go through the pictures very quickly and open them in Photoshop when you find one you want. This tool will work in Macs through the Parallels desktop.